The air hangs thick with dust and indifference. A girl stands on the block, a number chalked onto her sleeve. 7. They call her Ruin. She doesn't flinch. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sky, are fixed on nothing. The auctioneer's voice drones on, calling her damaged goods. A bid comes from a pig farmer, his eyes crawling over her like vermin. She doesn't blink. Then, a voice cuts through the grime, low and resonant, like thunder rolling across a distant plain. Jedediah, VO 15. The crowd turns. A man leans against a post in the back, shadow hiding his face, only the hard line of his jaw visible. He is tall, broad-shouldered, a man carved from the unforgiving land itself. The auctioneer squints. Auctioneer, she's broken, friend. Mute as a stone. The man, Jedediah, pushes off the post. He doesn't speak again. He walks to the platform, his steps deliberate, final. He places worn bills on the wood. The hammer falls. Sold. As he turns, his eyes meet hers for the first time. There's no pity in them. There's something far more dangerous. A spark. A recognition. A fire meeting gasoline. Part 1. The silence and the spark. He didn't touch her. The men before, the ones who owned her for a night or a week, they always grabbed. Their hands were assertions of ownership, brutal punctuation marks on her existence. Jedediah simply nodded toward the alley, his gaze a silent command that was somehow more compelling than any force. She followed, not from trust, but from a deep, weary understanding of consequences. The alley smelled of stale beer and regret. He didn't offer platitudes. He held out a heavy wool shawl, the color of dried blood. She stared at it, her mind a whirlwind of suspicion. Kindness was a currency she'd never been paid in. It was usually a down payment for a future horror. "It's clean," he said, his voice a low rumble. It wasn't gentle. It was factual. Her stillness was a shield she'd perfected over years. He saw it, not as emptiness, but as a fortress. He didn't push. He knelt, his movements surprisingly fluid for a man his size, and laid the shawl on a crate. As he rose, his eyes locked with hers again. The air crackled. It wasn't desire as she knew it, a greasy, desperate thing. This was different. It was a raw, magnetic pull, a silent acknowledgement of the wildness in each other. He saw the storm in her eyes and wasn't afraid of the rain. "Got a name?" he asked. She gave a short, sharp shake of her head. Her name had been a word used to summon her for pain. It had been stripped of meaning, beaten out of her until it was just a sound. "Mine's Jedediah," he said, the name sounding like it was hewn from rock. "You can use it if you need to shield yourself." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "I didn't buy you for labor. I bought you to stop them." The words landed not like a comfort, but like a challenge. A fissure cracked through the ice that encased her heart. It wasn't warmth, not yet. It was the sharp, painful intake of breath after being submerged for too long. She sank onto the crate beside the shawl, her fingers tracing the rough weave, but not claiming it. He didn't fill the silence. He sat on a barrel opposite her, the space between them charged, electric. He seemed to understand that her silence wasn't empty, it was a language. And in the quiet hum of the dying afternoon, he was listening. The town might call her Ruin, but in his presence for the first time she felt like a storm gathering strength. The ride to his cabin was wordless. The landscape bled into a palette of rust and gray as they left the squalor of the town behind. The horse's rhythm was a steady heartbeat beneath her, a rhythm she focused on to quiet the noise in her head. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was thick with unspoken questions, with the palpable energy that had sparked in the alley. She could feel his awareness of her, a constant low hum at the edge of her senses. It wasn't threatening. It was grounding. The cabin was nestled between two granite shoulders of a hill, a solitary outpost against the vast, lonely sky. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress. He dismounted, his movements economical and sure. He didn't help her down. He opened the door and went inside, leaving the choice to her. For a full minute, she sat on the horse, every instinct screaming that this was a new kind of trap. But the wind had teeth, and a gnawing hunger was a more immediate tyrant. She slid from the horse, her legs weak, and pushed the door open. The inside smelled of cedar, wood smoke, and something else. Him. A scent of leather, earth, and a faint metallic tang of gunpowder. It was a man's space, stark and functional. A rifle rested above the hearth, and a small, sturdy bookshelf stood in the corner, its contents well worn. It was the cleanest, most orderly place she had been in for years. His presence filled the room. He was stoking the fire, his back to her. The muscles in his shoulders and back moved with a powerful grace under his shirt. He was a creature of contained force, and a tremor, not of fear, but of a strange, unfamiliar excitement, ran through her. "There's stew," he said, not turning. "Sit." He pointed to a chair by the fire. She obeyed, curling into it, making herself small out of habit. He ladled a thick, dark stew into a tin bowl and handed it to her. His fingers brushed hers. A jolt, sharp and hot, shot up her arm. She jerked her hand back as if burned, the stew sloshing. Their eyes met over the bowl. His were dark, intense, and for a fleeting second, she saw a flicker of the same fire she felt. He saw her, not as a broken thing, but as a woman. "It ain't poisoned," he said, his voice rougher than before. "I've eaten worse," she rasped, the words scratching her throat. It was the first thing she'd said to him. A corner of his mouth tilted, not a smile, but an acknowledgement. "Good. Eat." She ate. The food was a simple, profound miracle. As she scraped the bowl clean, she felt his gaze on her. It wasn't judgmental. It was watchful, possessive. When she was done, he took the bowl, his movements silent and deliberate. "The cot by the window is yours," he said, gesturing with his chin. "No one comes out this far. You're safe from them." He paused, his gaze sweeping over her, lingering on the pulse beating in her throat. "You're safe with me." The promise hung in the air, heavy and double-edged. "Why me?" The question screamed in her mind, but she couldn't voice it. As if hearing her thoughts, he turned to the fire. "They looked at you and saw a thing to be used up," he said, his voice a low growl. "I looked at you, and I saw a reflection." She didn't know what to do with that. The intensity of it was overwhelming. She wrapped herself in the shawl he'd given her, its scent now mingled with the wood smoke in his own. Lying on the cot, she faced the wall, her body humming with a strange, wild energy. She wasn't his prisoner. She wasn't his servant. She was something else. And as sleep finally claimed her, it wasn't peaceful. It was a turbulent, restless sleep, filled with dreams of fire and shadow, of a man's dark eyes promising not gentle safety, but a beautiful, terrifying ruin of a different kind. Part 2. Forging a name in fire. She woke to a profound silence, broken only by the cawing of a distant raven. For a moment she was adrift, unmoored from the brutal reality of her past. Then she saw it, the faint, deliberate carving in the wooden mantelpiece above the cold hearth. Jedediah. A name that stood like a mountain, weathered but unbroken. He was outside, the rhythmic thwack of an axe splitting wood a steady counterpoint to the morning's quiet. She watched him from the doorway, a silhouette of raw power against the pale dawn. He moved with a brutal efficiency, each swing a testament to a life of hardship and strength. He didn't seem to be working. He seemed to be at war with the wood, channeling some deep internal rage into the task. "Coffee's on the stove," he said without turning. His senses were unnervingly sharp. She stepped out, drawn not by the offer of coffee, but by the magnetic pull of his presence. The air was cold, but a strange heat emanated from him, a dangerous warmth that beckoned her closer. "You always let strays sleep in your house?" she asked, her voice stronger than it had been the night before. He stopped, resting the axe on a chopping block. He turned to face her, his eyes dark and searching. "Only the ones with teeth." A shiver that had nothing to do with the cold traced its way down her spine. What if I decided to rob you? Slit your throat in your sleep? The words were a test, a challenge. He took a step closer, closing the distance between them until she had to tilt her head back to look at him. He smelled of sweat, pine, and something primal. You could try, he murmured, his voice a low, intimate growl. But I don't think you would. The fire in you isn't for petty cruelties. It's for burning down the world that hurt you. Her breath hitched. He saw her. He saw the rage she kept banked like embers, the fury she had mistaken for brokenness. He didn't just see her. He understood her. What do I do here? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. What do you expect? I expect you to breathe, he said, his gaze dropping to her lips. I expect you to eat, and I expect you to remember how to fight. The rest will follow. He gestured to the cabin. This place is a sanctuary, not a cage. But out there, he nodded to the vast, indifferent wilderness. Out there you need to be a weapon. I can teach you. The offer hung in the air, more potent than any declaration of affection. He wasn't offering her protection. He was offering her power. Later that day, a storm rolled in, trapping them in the cabin's close confines. The air grew thick, charged with unspoken tension. Every accidental brush of hands as they moved around the small space was like a lit match. She found herself watching him, the way his hands, calloused and strong, could be so precise as he cleaned his rifle, the way his eyes would find hers across the room, holding her captive in their intense, fiery depths. This was not the gentle kindness of a savior. This was the dangerous kinship of two wounded predators circling each other, recognizing the same wild spirit, the same capacity for both tenderness and violence. One evening, as she stared into the flames of the hearth, her fingers traced the rough-hewn letters of his name on the mantel. Is that you? She whispered, the question addressed more to the fire than to him. He looked up from the knife he was sharpening, his focus absolute. My father carved it, said a man's name is the first and last thing he truly owns. I don't have one, she said, the admission tasting like ash. Not one that's mine. He stopped his work. The sound of the whetstone ceased, leaving a ringing silence. He rose and walked to her, standing behind her so closely she could feel the heat of his body. He didn't speak, but he reached into a drawer and pulled out a small, sharp carving knife, its handle worn smooth. He pressed it into her hand, his fingers wrapping around hers for a moment. His touch was electric, a brand against her skin. Then make one, he commanded, his voice a low rumble in her ear. Carve it into the world, so it can never be erased. Her hand trembled, not with fear, but with a terrifying, exhilarating sense of power. She stood before the mantel, the space next to his name a blank slate, a future unwritten. The knife felt heavy, a weapon, a tool, an extension of her will. Slowly, deliberately, she began to carve. The wood resisted, then gave way. It was not a neat or practiced script. It was jagged, fierce, and utterly her own. When she was done, she stepped back, her chest heaving. 5 letters stood beside his, a defiant scar on the wood. Eliza. It was the name I gave myself in the dark, she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. The one they could never find, never touch. Eliza, he repeated, testing the name on his tongue. He stepped up beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. They stood together, staring at the 2 names side by side. Jedediah taught. Eliza died. Not a master and a servant. Not a savior and a victim. 2 forces of nature. 2 survivors. 2 names etched in wood. A silent pact sealed in the firelight. It wasn't a promise of safety. It was a declaration of a shared war, and in the charged silence of the cabin, a wild, dangerous love began to take root. Pontoon. Part 3. The Ghosts of Mill Ridge. The ghosts arrived on horseback just after dawn. Eliza saw them first, 2 silhouettes cresting the hill, their forms distorted by the rising sun. A cold dread, familiar and sickening, coiled in her gut. She didn't need to see their faces. She knew the swagger, the casual cruelty in their posture. They were from Mill Ridge. They were from her past. Jedediah stepped out onto the porch before they could even dismount. He didn't carry a rifle. He held a cup of coffee, the steam coiling into the crisp morning air. His stance was relaxed, almost lazy, but Eliza, watching from the window, could see the tension coiled in his shoulders. He was a wolf, pretending to be a sheepdog. "Morin," the taller one sneered, his eyes flicking from Jedediah to the cabin, searching. "We're looking for some property that went missing. Property of the county. Ain't no property here," Jedediah said, his voice deceptively mild. He took a slow sip of his coffee. "Just me. We heard different," the second man chimed in, spitting a stream of tobacco juice near Jedediah's boot. "Heard you outbid the county for that little piece of ruin from the auction. Got a writ here, says she belongs to us." He waved a grimy piece of paper. Jedediah's eyes narrowed, the mildness vanishing, replaced by a glint of granite. "That piece of paper means you can talk to the sheriff. It don't mean you can set foot on my land. We ain't askin'," the first man growled, reaching for the pistol at his hip. In a movement so fast it was almost a blur, Jedediah's coffee cup shattered on the porch rail. In his hand, where the cup had been, was now a long, wicked-looking knife. He hadn't drawn it. It had simply appeared, as if it were an extension of his will. "I am." Jedediah's voice dropped to a deadly whisper. "And I'm telling you to turn your horses around before you learn just how deep this soil is." The men froze, their bravado evaporating in the face of such swift, silent menace. They were bullies, used to preying on the weak. Jedediah was not weak. He was something ancient and lethal. They exchanged a nervous glance, muttered a curse, and wheeled their horses around, kicking up dirt as they retreated. When Jedediah came back inside, the air was thick with the aftermath of the confrontation. Eliza stood frozen by the hearth, her hands clenched into fists. "They'll be back," she stated, her voice flat. "Yes," he agreed, cleaning his knife with a calm, deliberate motion. "Why?" The word tore from her throat, raw and ragged. "Why do this for me? You don't owe me anything." He stopped, his gaze locking onto hers. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping just before her. He reached out, not to touch her face or her shoulder, but to gently unclench one of her fists, his thumb stroking the white-knuckled landscape of her hand. The touch was a revelation, intimate and grounding. "You're wrong," he said, his voice a low, rough caress. "I looked at you on that block and I saw a woman with a spine made of steel and a soul full of wildfire. They tried to put that fire out, Eliza. They tried to break you." His eyes burned with a fierce, protective light that stole her breath. "Anyone who tries to hurt you is an enemy of mine. I owe it to myself to see that fire burn bright. I owe it to the world." Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, wild drumbeat. This wasn't pity. This was allegiance. This was a man seeing the warrior in her and choosing to stand with her, back to back against the world. The fear that had gripped her moments before transmuted into something else, a hot, surging rage, a ferocious desire to not just survive, but to conquer. She didn't pull her hand away. Instead, her fingers curled around his, a silent acceptance of the pact he offered. "We should eat," she said, her voice steady now, imbued with a new, hard-won strength. "We'll need our energy for the war." A slow, dangerous smile touched Jedediah's lips. It transformed his rugged face, making him look both handsome and terrifying. "Yes," he agreed. "We will." The trip to Mill Ridge was a necessity they could no longer avoid. They needed supplies. But it was more than that. It was a declaration. As they rode into the town's single dusty street, Eliza could feel the eyes on them. Whispers followed them like flies. "That's her. The ruin. With that strange man, Walker." They still called him by his old name. She sat taller in the saddle, her chin lifted. Beside her, Jedediah was a mountain of silent intimidation. They dismounted in front of the general store, and the silence that fell was heavy with judgment. The storekeeper, a man with a perpetually sour face, pointedly ignored her, addressing only Jedediah. "What can I get for you, Walker?" "She's the one buying," Jedediah said, his voice flat, leaving no room for argument. Eliza stepped forward, her list in hand. She placed it on the counter, her gaze meeting the storekeeper's without flinching. He grunted, his disapproval a palpable force. As he gathered the items, a woman with kind eyes and work-worn hands stepped up beside Eliza. "I heard you saved the miller's calf last month," the woman said, her voice clear and carrying through the silent store. "Pulled it from the mud in the freezing rain. That's more than most of the men in this town would do." A murmur went through the small crowd. The blacksmith's apprentice, a young man with soot on his brow, added a small bag of nails to her supplies. "On the house, ma'am," he muttered, avoiding her eyes but with a hint of respect in his tone. The tide was turning. It wasn't a flood, but a slow, inexorable shift. They weren't just seeing the ruin anymore. They were seeing Eliza. As they left, Jedediah's hand rested for a moment on the small of her back, a gesture of possession and pride that sent a bolt of heat straight through her. "Towns are like beasts," he said quietly as they rode away. "Show them fear, and they'll eat you alive. Show them you have no fear, and they'll eventually learn to respect you." Eliza looked back at the dusty street, at the faces in the windows that were no longer just sneering, but curious. "I'm not afraid," she said, and the truth of the words settled deep in her bones. "Not when you're with me." He didn't answer, but she felt his gaze on her, hot and intense, a promise of the fire that awaited them back at the cabin. Part 4. The Devil's Debt. The devil came back on a day when the sky was a bruised purple, threatening a storm that never broke. His name was Caleb Monroe, a man whose face was etched into the darkest corners of Eliza's memory. He was the one who had locked her in a cellar for 3 days for the crime of meeting his gaze. He found her by the creek, washing their clothes on a flat stone, her bare feet sunk into the cool mud. "Well, well," his voice oozed, a snake slithering through the quiet afternoon. "Look what the cat dragged in. I heard you'd found a new master. Didn't figure you'd last this long." Eliza froze, the wet shirt in her hand suddenly weighing 1,000 pounds. Her first instinct, honed by years of abuse, was to curl into herself, to become invisible. But then she felt it, the phantom heat of Jedediah's hand on her back, the memory of his voice calling her a warrior. She straightened up slowly, turning to face him. She did not speak. She let her eyes, cold and stormy, do the talking. He laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "Still silent. Some things never change. I'm here on behalf of my cousin. You were bought with borrowed money, girl, and I'm the one sent to collect the debt. I owe you nothing," she said, her voice low and steady, surprising them both. "Your body does," he sneered, taking a step closer. "Every broken piece of you." That's when Jedediah emerged from the tree line. He wasn't running. He was just there. He held a skinning knife in one hand, casually testing its edge with his thumb. He looked like he'd been tracking a deer and had stumbled upon a maggot instead. "You have 3 seconds to get off my land," Jedediah said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the air, sharp and final. Caleb spat on the ground. "You think you can protect this trash forever, old man? She's ruined, tainted goods." "No," Jedediah replied, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. Eliza didn't move back. She held her ground beside him. They were a united front. She was wounded by vermin like you. There's a difference. He flicked his gaze to Caleb, and the sheer, unadulterated violence in his eyes made Caleb flinch. "Now she's healing, and she's mine." The word hung in the air. Mine. It wasn't the word of an owner. It was the word of a dragon guarding its hoard. It was a claim forged in fire and respect, a possessiveness so absolute it was its own kind of worship. Eliza's heart swelled, a fierce, wild pride surging through her. Caleb, fueled by wounded pride and whiskey courage, lunged. "Try me, old man." He never made it. Jedediah moved with the grace of a panther. It wasn't a fight. It was a dismantling. A swift block, a brutal elbow to the jaw that sent Caleb staggering back, spitting a tooth. Before Caleb could recover, Jedediah had him by the throat, pinning him against a cottonwood tree, the skinning knife pressed just under his chin. That was one. Jedediah breathed, his face inches from Caleb's, his eyes burning with a cold, terrifying fury. 2 is when I start carving. You really want to see what 3 looks like? Terror finally broke through Caleb's bluster. He shook his head, his eyes wide and pleading. Shall never be anything, he choked out, a last desperate insult. You can't turn mud into silver. Jedediah didn't answer him. His eyes were on Eliza. She stepped forward, her gaze locked on Caleb's terrified face. Maybe not, she said, her voice clear and ringing with power. But you can plant a wildflower in it, one that's strong enough to choke out all the weeds. Jedediah released him, shoving him to the ground. Caleb scrambled away, crawling backward before finding his feet and running. A pathetic, broken creature fleeing a fire he had foolishly provoked. The silence that descended was profound. The air still vibrated with violence. Eliza was shaking, not with fear, but with the sheer adrenaline of the confrontation. Jedediah turned to her, his eyes still dark with fury. He reached out, his hand cupping her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheekbone. His touch was rough, possessive, and yet unbelievably tender. You didn't run, he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. I'm tired of being taken, she breathed, her eyes searching his. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. His breath was warm on her skin. The world narrowed to the space between them, the scent of him, the heat of him. The passion that had been simmering between them for weeks finally boiled over. It was no longer a question of if, but when. He never owned you, Jedediah growled, his voice thick with emotion. No one ever did. Your fire was always your own. She nodded, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of release. He didn't wipe it away. He leaned in and kissed the salty track on her skin, a gesture of worship, of reverence for her strength, for her survival. The kiss was a brand, a promise. It sealed the unspoken truth between them. Theirs was not a gentle love story. It was a wild, untamed thing, born of violence and survival, a fire that would either forge them into something stronger or burn them both to ash. And in that moment, standing by the creek with the taste of victory and ozone in the air, neither of them cared which. Part 5. A woman, named and known. The invitation to the harvest gathering was an olive branch, tentative and fragile. It was delivered by the blacksmith's wife, Ruth, who placed it directly into Eliza's hands, not Jedediah's. It was a small thing, but it was everything. It was an acknowledgement. We'd be honored to have you both, Ruth said, her smile genuine. Folks are saying your garden is the only thing that grew right this season. We could all learn a thing or two. Eliza spent the entire day in a state of nervous energy. She had never been invited anywhere. She had only ever been summoned, dragged, or sold. The concept of being a welcome guest was foreign, a language she didn't speak. She washed and ironed her best dress, a simple calico garment, her hands trembling slightly. As the sun began to bleed across the horizon, casting long shadows, a different kind of tension built in the cabin. The unspoken passion that had been ignited by the creek now filled every corner of the small space. As Eliza dressed, she could feel Jedediah's eyes on her. When she turned, he was standing by the door, watching her, his expression intense, possessive, and filled with a raw hunger that made her skin prickle. You look, he started, his voice rough, then stopped, as if words were inadequate. I feel like I'm in a costume, she admitted, smoothing down the front of her dress. He crossed the room, his presence dominating the space. He stopped in front of her, his hands coming up to cup her face, his calloused thumbs tracing the line of her jaw. Don't ever hide behind it, he murmured, his gaze burning into hers. Let them see the queen they're bowing to. Let them see the fire. His lips crashed down on hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was fierce, desperate, acclaiming. It was the culmination of weeks of unspoken desire, of shared danger and silent understanding. It was a kiss that spoke of survival and defiance, of two wild hearts recognizing each other. She melted into him, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer. The kiss was a storm, a wildfire, and when they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. The world tilted on its axis. "Now," he breathed, his forehead resting against hers. "Let's go." They walked into the Granger farm holding hands. It was a silent, bold declaration that rippled through the gathered crowd. The laughter and music faltered for a moment as all eyes turned to them. They saw not the broken girl and the strange recluse, but a man and a woman, united and formidable. The wall of suspicion did not crumble. It was dismantled, piece by piece. The blacksmith offered Jedediah a mug of cider and clapped him on the shoulder. Ruth Granger pulled Eliza into a conversation about canning beans. The schoolteacher, a prim woman named Miss Albright, asked Eliza if she could read. "Jedediah is teaching me," Eliza replied, her voice steady. The turning point came when Mrs. Tilley, the town midwife, a woman whose opinion held more weight than the mayor's, approached them. Her eyes, sharp and discerning, assessed Eliza from head to toe. "I heard what you did for the Miller calf," she said. "And I saw you face down Caleb Monroe's ghost. This town has been full of whispers and weak men for too long." She took Eliza's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "We are lucky to have a woman like you here. A woman. Not a girl. Not a stray. Not property. A woman." The words settled over Eliza, a cloak of honor she had never dared to dream of. She felt Jedediah's hand tighten on hers, his pride a palpable force beside her. Later that night, as the stars blazed in the ink-black sky, they sat on a blanket away from the main crowd. The sounds of the party were a distant, happy murmur. "They see you now," Jedediah said, his voice a low rumble in the dark. "They see us," she corrected softly, leaning her head on his shoulder. The gesture was easy, natural. He turned her face to his expression serious in the moonlight. "I see you, Eliza. I have from the very first moment. I saw the fight in you, the strength you thought was your ruin. It was never your ruin. It was your crown." He kissed her again, slower this time, deeper. It was a kiss of reverence, of absolute devotion. It wasn't about passion or defiance anymore. It was about two souls finding their anchor in each other. It was about building a home not of wood and nails, but of trust and a fierce, unwavering love. Back at the cabin, the fire in the hearth cast dancing shadows on the walls. The carved names, Jedediah and Eliza, seemed to glow with a life of their own. He led her to the cot, and in the warm, flickering light, they came together. It was not a taking, but a giving. It was a silent, sacred conversation between two people who had been forged in the harshest fires of the West and had found not just survival, but salvation in each other's arms. They were no longer two separate, broken people. They were one, whole and unbreakable. Part 6. The Weight of a Word. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. The postman, a nervous young man new to the route, had ridden far out of his way to deliver it, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe at the sight of Jedediah. But the letter wasn't for him. It was addressed in a neat official script to Miss Eliza, homesteader, Mill Ridge Territory. Eliza stared at it, her name, her new identity, written in ink. It felt heavier than a gold nugget. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a certificate, stamped with a government seal, and a short, formal letter. It was from a territorial judge. "Due to a clerical error," she read aloud, her voice barely a whisper, "the transfer of your wardship was never legally finalized. As of this letter, you are declared a legally independent citizen, free of all prior claims. Furthermore, due to the complications of your previous placement, you are entitled to a restitution payment of $30 and permanent residence approval in this territory." $30. What? And a word. Independent. The paper shook in her hands. It was freedom, not granted by a man, but recognized by the law. It was proof. She looked at Jedediah, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Why now? He took the letter from her, his gaze sweeping over the words. A slow smile spread across his face. Because you did more than survive, Eliza. You fought. You built something. You forced the world to see you. Even paper and ink have to bend to a will that's strong. Do I keep it? She whispered. You frame it, he said, his voice thick with pride. You hang it on the wall, right beside your name. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat by the fire, the letter in her lap, her heart too full for rest. The girl she had been, the silent, frightened creature on the auction block, felt like a ghost from another life. She had a name. She had a home. She had a man who looked at her not as a ruin to be fixed, but as a queen to be worshipped. The next morning, Jedediah built a frame from a piece of smooth, dark cherry wood. He hung the certificate by the door, a declaration to any who entered. Proof of arrival. Spring arrived that year, not with a gentle thaw, but with a vibrant, explosive burst of life. The wild flowers choked out the weeds. The creek ran full and clear, and Eliza bloomed with it. She was no longer the town's secret or its shame. They called her teacher when she started a small, informal school for the handful of children on the outskirts, teaching them to read from an old book of poems Jedediah owned. They called her healer when she used her knowledge of herbs, learned in the harshest of circumstances, to soothe Mrs. Tilley's arthritis. They called her neighbor when she helped rebuild a fence for the Granger family after a storm, working side by side with the men, her strength and stamina, earning their quiet respect. At the town's planting festival, she stood on the stage, not as a spectacle, but as a leader. She read out the names of the families receiving seeds for the season, her voice clear and strong, carrying across the crowd. Afterward, a little girl, the storekeeper's daughter, shyly approached her and pressed a daisy into her hand. Mama says you're what hope looks like, the girl whispered. Eliza's heart clenched. She looked across the festival grounds and saw Jedediah leaning against a fence post, watching her. His arms were crossed, his expression unreadable from a distance, but she felt his pride like the sun on her skin. He didn't need to wave. Their connection was a silent, unbreakable cord that stretched across any distance. Walking home later, the dirt path soft beneath her boots, a profound sense of peace settled over her. She was tired, but it was the good, deep exhaustion that comes from meaningful work. She was strong. She was known. She never forgot the name they first gave her. Ruin Dutch. She kept it buried deep inside, not as a source of shame, but as a reminder of the bedrock she had built her new life upon. The West was a land of forgetting, a place where people came to erase their pasts. But Eliza had not erased hers. She had faced it, fought it, and transformed it. The girl they called Ruin didn't just survive. She hadn't just found love. She had remade the world around her, proving that from the most broken ground, the most beautiful, untamable things can grow. She was no longer a ruin. She was a landmark. In the heart of the unforgiving West, a place that measures a soul by its capacity to endure. A story was etched not in stone, but in the heart of a community. It's the story of Eliza and Jedediah. It teaches us that our true name isn't the one we are given by a cruel world, but the one we have the courage to claim for ourselves. It shows that love isn't always a gentle flame. Sometimes it's a wildfire that burns away the old world to make way for the new. True strength isn't the absence of scars, but the courage to wear them as a map of where we've been, and a testament to the fact that we survived. The greatest legends of the West aren't about gunfights at high noon, but about the quiet, fierce battles fought within the human heart for dignity, for love, and for a place to call home. Thank you for joining us on Wild West Stories. If this tale resonated with you, please consider liking this video, sharing it with others, and subscribing to our channel for more stories from the untamed heart of the frontier.